So let's apply what we learned so far. The IS curve, MP curve, and the output gap Phillips curve to one example. The example here is how Federal Reserve used a monetary policy to fight the recession. First, let's draw the IS MP curve. For the IS MP curve, the graph here, variable on the y-axis is the real interest rate. The variable on the y-axis is output gap, y bar. And we know the IS curve shows a negative relationship between the real interest rate and the output. IS curve is downward sloping curve. And we know MP curve is horizontal curve. It shows the interest rate controlled by the Federal Reserve. And in the long run, these three lines will intersect with each other. This is the output gap equals 0. So which means the output is the same as the potential GDP YP. For this curve, I would like you again to quickly review. The IS curve shows the equilibrium in the output market or goods market. The MP curve is the interest rate or real interest rate are determined by the Fed. So the first one is a goods market. The second one is more like a money market. So these two together determine the equilibrium output on the graph. And then we draw another graph below this one. This one is what we learned previously called output gap Phillips curve. And we know in original Phillips curve describe the negative relationship between the inflation rate and unemployment rate. So it's a downward sloping curve. But for the output gap version of the Phillips curve, we actually put the inflation rate here. But instead of the unemployment, we put the GDP or output gap here, y bar. As a result, the output gap Phillips curve is the upward sloping curve. So we use the PC to show the Phillips curve, and we try to connect these two graphs together. So we extend the long run equilibrium output here. So that's output gap equals 0. So which means real GDP is the same as the potential GDP here. And this will determine the equilibrium inflation rate pi 1. And back to the ISMP curve, the intersection also determines the equilibrium real interest rate. So now, can we use this model to describe how Federal Reserve fight the recession? So first step, if there's a recession happened, this could be caused like stock market crash, suppose. And we know if the stock market crash, that's a typical negative aggregate demand curve, aggregate demand shock. Why? Because when the stock market crashed, the people's wealth decreased. As a result, people will cut their spending on the goods and the service. Consumption goes down. And using the AE function, when stock market cost consumption level goes down, aggregate expenditure goes down. That's what we said, typical negative aggregate demand shock. As we learned previously, when there's a negative aggregate demand shock happened, the IS curve shifts to left. So use ISMP curve, we can show IS curve will shift to the left. That's the first step. With this new IS curve and MP curve, we know the GDP will go down, which means output gap goes down as well. So output gap goes down to the Y1. If we look at another model, because output gap goes down to the Y1, we extend this line to here. With lower level of the output gap Y1, inflation rate also goes down. So that's what happened to the output gap Phillips curve. Inflation rate goes down as well. So when a recession happens in the step 1, what should Federal Reserve do? That's step 2. And then we can imagine with a lower level of output, Federal Reserve will use expansionary monetary policy to fight the recession. So the Fed will adopt expansionary monetary policy to stimulate economy. The typical expansionary monetary policy is conducted by increasing money supply. So how could this affect this model here? And we know in the ISMP model, the vertical variable is real interest rate. But if you still can recall what we learned previously, the liquidity preference model, we can quickly show here. Liquidity preference model, real interest rate is on the vertical axis. Real money balance, MP, is on the vertical axis. In the horizontal axis, that's money supply curve, real money supply, MP. That's money demand, MD. So these two determine the interest rate. Suppose R0, or we can say R1, initial interest rate. When the money supply MS increase, it will shift the money supply curve to the MP prime here because the numerator M increase. With the new real money supply curve, we can see from this graph, the interest rate, real interest rate will drop. So when the Federal Reserve use the expansionary monetary policy, it involved increasing money supply, or at the same time we can say involved the cutting down the real interest rate. So when the real interest rate goes down, let's go back to ISMP model. In order to help economy go back to the initial output level or output gap equals 0, Federal Reserve cut the interest rate. And we know when the Federal Reserve cut interest rate, the MP curve will shift downward. MP curve shift downward. And it help economy to move back the equilibrium output. But at the same time, the real interest rate will go down. And if we go back to the output gap Phillips curve, now in order to push up the output back to the output gap y equals 0, the inflation rate have to go up. Inflation rate have to go up from the pi 2 to pi 1, because then the output level will go back to the initial level. So output level in the second step increased because of the Federal Reserve reduced the real interest rate. At the same time, the inflation rate will increase. So that's how Federal Reserve used the expansion rate monetary policy to fight the recession. The conclusion here is the first step when the recession happened, it shifts the IS curve to the left, which reduced the output level, Y decreased. And use the output gap Phillips curve. With lower level of output, inflation rate also go down. But in order to fight this recession, Federal Reserve increase money supply, so which will shift the MP curve downward. So in that case, the Y will increase. Y will increase from the Y1 back to the Y bar 0. So output will increase. But using the output gap Phillips curve, and you will find out in order to move from the Y1 back to the Y bar 0, the inflation rate have to go up. So that's how the Federal Reserve fight the recession using the monetary policy. And we combine the ISMP model with the output gap Phillips curve model together to analyze this case.